It's the OG Fact Checker, here to give you a juicy tidbit of history that's verified. For this TOFC post, I'm spilling some tea. That tea won't be tasty, and it's got too much lemon juice, and I'll be spilling it in two parts. I'm going to tell you the story of 4 black men who have the common denominator of attending the U.S. Naval Academy in the 19th and 20th centuries. But that common denominator only worked out well for one of the 4 as far as graduating successfully, and it really didn't work out well for the man who was the first to break a barrier. The first black man to be admitted to the U.S. Naval Academy was 16-year-old James Henry Conyers of Charleston, South Carolina, born a free man in 1856. Upon receiving a congressional appointment from U.S. Representative Robert Brown Elliott, an American-born man of Afro-Caribbean descent from South Carolina, Conyers entered the academy in 1872. Hazing was a problem before Conyers entered the academy, and legislation was enacted by Congress to end that behavior. But it was still an issue, and hazing intensified when Conyers arrived. His classmates refused to interact or work with him unless given orders to do so, and even then, some would ignore those orders. In one incident, a midshipman named Claude refused an order to engage in a class fencing exercise with Conyers. For this action, Claude was reported for disobeying an order. When Claude was given the choice of apologizing to Conyers or leaving the academy, he chose to leave. At one point, the crappy treatment against Conyers turned into outright assault from another midshipman named Diggs from Maryland, who was dismissed from the academy. Naturally, Conyers' academic performance suffered between the hazing and getting in trouble repeatedly, resulting in multiple court-martials. He was dismissed in August 1873. He tried to re-enter through examinations, but he failed those and decided to resign his commission. Now, if you recall from my TOFC post on my abbreviated civil rights timeline, I said blacks had white allies in the fight for equality. One of those allies was Secretary of the Navy George Maxwell Robeson, who served from 1869 to 1877. Information I found says Robeson recognized Conyers was being treated unfairly, which is why after every court-martial, he restored Conyers to duty. But according to an article by the U.S. Naval Institute, the Academy was not prepared to cope with a Negro midshipman, even if he had been a model of deportment. Very little is known about Conyers' life after the Academy. What is known is that he was a shoemaker, he got married, had 10 children with 8 surviving to adulthood, and lived an unassuming life until his death at 72. About 6 weeks before Conyers' departure, Alonzo McLennan of South Carolina arrives at the academy as the second black man to attend. He was appointed by U.S. Representative Richard Harvey Kane of South Carolina, a black man born free in 1825 in Greenbrier County, Virginia, now West Virginia. McLennan initially lasted only 6 months. He was discharged in March 1874, and he resigned his commission in November 1875. The reason given for his discharge was academic deficiency. You might be wondering about the time frame between the date he was discharged and the date he resigned. If you ask McLennan himself, he would tell you a sad story with a happy ending. McLennan stated in a New York Times article that he was court-martialed for a petty offense he denied committing, but it was his word against the cadet who accused him of the offense. Everyone thought McLennan was lying, and they were about to dismiss him. Once again, Secretary Robeson intervened and ordered the academy to re-enroll him. I'm not sure why or how, but he's assigned on board the USS Santee, and an incident at Chow between him and a shipmate lands him in the ship's brig, where he was kept until he resigned. This explains why he was dismissed in 1874 and resigned in 1875. Professors at the academy hooked him up with an educational opportunity in Massachusetts, and he became a successful physician and drugstore owner in Charleston. Henry E. Baker Jr., born in 1857 in Columbus, Mississippi, is the third Black man to attend. He arrived in September 1874, 6 months after McClellan's discharge in March 1874. Baker is different in that he received his appointment from one of those white allies I talked about, U.S. Representative Henry W. Berry of Mississippi, a former Union Army soldier who led a regiment of Black troops in Kentucky. Baker lasted only 14 months. He was quickly labeled academically deficient and was held back, pushing him to the class of 1879 instead of 1878. The hazing he experienced was even worse than what Conyers and McClellan experienced. During one incident, an officer had to pull his sword to protect Baker. In another, he was attacked by a squad of midshipmen as they were marching across the yard. That incident was investigated and some were punished, but Baker was ultimately court-martialed out of the academy in November 1875 for misconduct by slinging some sort of insult at another midshipman during an incident at the mess hall. Secretary Robeson wanted to step in again, but Baker was like, "Nah, man, I'm good. I'll just resign." And it was all good for Baker. He earned a law degree from Howard University and became a patent office examiner. In fact, he made it his business to record patent applications from Blacks, going so far as to do what would be called crowdsourcing today, to find Black inventors who often weren't awarded patents because of cost or other barriers. There were other attempts to appoint Blacks to the academy, but they fizzled out, mostly through academic deficiencies or no shows for entry exams. It would take 54 years after Baker's dismissal for the first Black man, Wesley A. Brown, to successfully graduate from the academy. Wesley, a Washington, D.C. native, was appointed by U.S. Representative Adam Clayton Powell from New York. I know what you might be wondering. Why is a representative from New York representing someone from Washington, D.C., and how did they connect? It's a good question, and it requires some more digging, which I didn't have time to do for this post. Anyway, Brown was already at Howard University when he transferred to the academy in 1954. He experienced the same treatment his predecessors received, and quite often Powell would have to step in to dispel the smear campaign against Brown's academic abilities. Whether there was a deliberate smear campaign remains to be seen, but the end result is that it didn't work. Brown graduated in 1959, and he was commissioned as an engineer in the Civil Engineer Corps. He retired after 20 years of service in 1969. I love history. The more you know.